Somewhere in the early years of The Simpsons, the show hid the real voice of one of the most famous singers alive inside a single episode, buried under a fake name in the credits, and kept it secret for years. That is just one of the strange, quiet things tucked into the corners of this show. Over more than 30 years, The Simpsons has cut whole scenes, buried jokes in single frames, hidden an entire movie across its episodes, and quietly made beloved episodes disappear. Tonight, slowly and softly, we're going to walk through all of it. Every deleted scene, every hidden secret, every small thing the show left for the people patient enough to look. Welcome to Yellowfan. Let's begin. The family, the town, and the letters. Hidden in Homer. The Simpsons first arrived on television in 1989, and it has kept running ever since, longer than almost any other show in American history. Most people who grew up with it can picture the whole thing without trying. The yellow skin, the big front window, the orange couch, the little house at the end of the street. What fewer people ever slow down to think about is how much of that world was built out of small, private pieces of one real man's life. The names of the family, the town they live in, even the exact shape of a character's head. A lot of what seems made up at random in Springfield was placed there on purpose, very quietly, by people who never expected anyone to look closely enough to find it. The man behind all of it is Matt Groening. Before The Simpsons, he drew a weekly comic strip and was asked to come up with a few short cartoons for another television program. He went to meet a producer named James L. Brooks, and while he sat waiting in the lobby outside the office, he started sketching a cartoon family on paper. He was in a rush. He needed names, and he needed them fast. So he reached for the easiest names in the world, the ones he had known his entire life. He used the names of his own family. Homer, the father, carries the name of Matt Groening's real father, who truly was named Homer. The real Homer Groening had almost nothing in common with the cartoon. He was a quiet, thoughtful man who made films, drew his own cartoons, and had flown a heavy bomber plane during the war. Matt has said that handing his father's name to a slow, lazy, donut-loving character was partly a small private joke between the two of them. By every account, the real Homer did not seem to mind much. He even came to enjoy the strange fame of it. The mother of the family, Marge, was named after Matt's mother, whose full name was Margaret. Her hair was never blue, and she has gently pointed that out more than once over the years. Marge has two sisters in the show, the gruff, smoking, gravel-voiced twins named Patty and Selma. The name Patty came straight from real life because Matt's mother had an older sister named Patty. There is an even smaller secret folded into the mother side of the family. Margaret's name before she married was Wiggum. Anyone who has watched the show for a while knows Wiggum as the last name of the town's police chief, the round, mustached officer who is almost always eating a donut or sleeping on the job. The chief quietly carries the family name of the creator's own mother, sitting in the background of hundreds of episodes where nearly no one would ever think to look for it. The two daughters, Lisa and Maggie, were named after Matt's two younger sisters. The real Lisa grew up to become a teacher, and the real Maggie became a writer. Both have said that being linked to a cartoon for life is a very odd thing, and that they are nothing like the characters who share their names. Only one member of the family was left out of this pattern. Matt did not name the son after himself. He took the word brat, the kind of word a tired grown-up might mutter at a misbehaving child, and he shuffled the four letters around until they spelled a name. Brat became Bart. So the most troublemaking child in the entire town walks around with a name that is really just a quiet description of exactly what he is. Decades later, the real people behind these names have spent a strange amount of time answering questions about it. The real Lisa has talked about how every so often a student in her class will suddenly make the connection and look at her differently, and how she has to explain that she had nothing to do with making the show and does not, in fact, play the saxophone. Matt himself has admitted that while none of his relatives match their cartoon versions, he sees little bits of his own personality scattered across all five of them. A bit of Homer's silliness, a bit of Bart's rule-breaking, a bit of Lisa's need to be right about everything. The borrowing did not stop at the family. Matt grew up in Portland, Oregon, and he sprinkled the names of real Portland streets all through the town of Springfield. Flanders, the cheerful next-door neighbor who is always so kind it becomes annoying. Lovejoy, the bored and tired church minister. Kearney, one of the older school bullies who hangs around with a gang of troublemakers. Each of those last names is a real street in the city where Matt grew up. He has said that early on he wanted to name every single character after a Portland street, but there were simply too many characters and not enough time, so he gave up on the idea partway through. Even the address of the family home, the famous Evergreen Terrace, is tied to a street name from his own childhood. The whole town, in a sense, is a soft map of one person's early life, redrawn in yellow. That long, quiet trail of real names leads to the biggest question the show ever carried, a question that followed it around for more than 20 years. answers. Where is Springfield? Which state is it actually in? The family had a home address and a town and neighbors and a school, yet the country around them stayed blurry on purpose. The show never seemed to want to give a straight answer. In fact, the writers turned the missing answer into a long-running game. In one episode, the daughter Lisa walks up to a map and points directly at the exact spot where the town sits, ready to settle it once and for all. At that precise moment, the boy Bart leans his big round head into the frame and blocks the view completely, so the audience never gets to see the spot. Other episodes dropped little hints that pointed at one state and then dropped other hints that pointed somewhere completely different, until none of them lined up and the puzzle became impossible to solve. The not knowing was the joke. Then, in 2012, after more than 20 years of silence, Matt Groening finally gave a real answer to a magazine. He said the town was named after Springfield, Oregon, a real place not far from where he grew up. The reason reached all the way back to his childhood. There had been an older black and white television show called Father Knows Best, set in a place called Springfield, and as a young boy, he had imagined that the make-believe town was the real Springfield, sitting just south of his hometown. He liked the name for a second reason, too. Springfield turns out to be one of the most common town names in the whole United States, with dozens of them spread across many different states. He figured that if he used such a plain, everywhere kind of name, then people watching from all over the country would each quietly believe the show was set somewhere near them, and that is more or less what ended up happening. When it came to the boy, the choice was even more personal than it looked. Before settling on Bart, Matt Groening had thought about simply naming the character after himself, calling the boy Matt. He decided that pitching a cartoon with a lead character sharing his own name might come across as strange in a meeting full of television people, so he set the idea aside and reached for the shuffled letters of Brat instead. The character still carried a great deal of him, though. Groening has said the troublemaking boy was modeled in large part on his own younger self, on the kid who got sent to the principal's office and quietly planned to get even later in life. So Bart became a version of his creator hiding behind a different name, the only child in the family not named after a real relative, yet perhaps the one drawn most directly from life. The trail of Portland names runs deeper than the few most people notice. Beyond Flanders, Lovejoy, and Kearney, other corners of the town carry the names of real streets from Groening's home city. The bumbling Mayor Quimby shares his name with a Portland street, and Sideshow Bob, the show's scheming villain, carries the full last name Terwilliger, taken from a road in the same city. Street by street, Groening lifted the map of the place he grew up and pressed it into the town of Springfield, scattering the roads of his childhood across the show as the surnames of its people. A person who once walked those Portland streets could, in a strange way, recognize half the town simply by reading the names on its mailboxes. The real people behind the family have lived quietly alongside their famous cartoon twins for decades. Groening's father, the real Homer, was a filmmaker, writer, and cartoonist, a thoughtful man who shared little with his lazy yellow cartoon double beyond a first name, and who, by his son's account, took the whole thing in good humor rather than offense. The real Lisa became a teacher, and the real Maggie became a writer, both far from the children drawn on screen. None of them asked to be turned into household names, and yet through one rush set of sketches in an office lobby, their first names ended up known to people in nearly every country on Earth, attached forever to a family that only ever borrowed them. Time eventually caught up with the real family, even as their cartoon shadows lived on. Groening's father passed away in the mid-1990s, by which point the lazy cartoon bearing his name was already one of the most recognized characters in the world. His mother, the real Margaret, lived into her 90s before she died years later, having spent decades answering the odd questions that came with sharing a name with one of television's most famous mothers, including the endless comments about hair that was never actually blue. The borrowed names outlived the people who first carried them. There is one gentle twist worth holding on to here. Matt Groening has openly admitted that for many years he gave fake answers on purpose. Whenever someone insisted the town was their own Springfield, in their own state, he would simply smile and agree, just to keep the mystery breathing. So even his big magazine reveal might be one more soft dodge dressed up as the truth. The show itself seemed to wink at the whole thing. Right after that interview came out, an episode opened with the usual gag of Bart writing a sentence over and over on the school chalkboard, and the sentence joked that the true home of Springfield sits in every state except the one the person watching happens to live in. A friendly, knowing refusal to ever fully close the book. One last secret hides on the most famous head in the entire show. Homer Simpson is almost completely bald, with only a couple of curls of hair left on top and a single visible ear. For more than 30 years, those shapes have stayed exactly the same in every episode, and there is a real reason they look the way they do. The little squiggle of of hair on the side of Homer's head is drawn in the shape of the letter M. The curve of his ear, along with the short lines drawn inside it, forms the shape of the letter G. M and G. Matt Groening. The creator drew his own initials into the side of his most famous character's face and simply left them there, sitting in the open, on a head that has been seen by hundreds of millions of people around the world. Groening has pointed this out himself, and when he draws Homer for fans at events, he still shapes that ear like a soft, rounded letter G to make it clear. Once those two letters have been noticed, it becomes nearly impossible to look at Homer's head and not see them. All of these hidden pieces share one simple thing in common. Every one of them was placed at the very beginning, long before anyone had any idea the show would become huge, by people who were mostly just quietly entertaining themselves. The names of a real Oregon family, the streets of a real city, a real little town tucked into a real state, a pair of initials curled into the side of a cartoon ear. None of it was built to be studied or decoded. It was built to be lived alongside year after year, while the people watching slowly fell in love with the town they thought they had completely figured out. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The funny thing is that the show did not only hide things in plain sight, sitting right there for anyone patient enough to spot them, it also did the opposite. It cut things away. It trimmed scenes out, threw some pieces in the trash, and quietly buried others where no one watching at home would ever find them. And one of the very first of these missing pieces was a small, strange, surprisingly dark moment removed from one of the most loved episodes ever made, snipped out and hidden long before a single family ever sat down to watch. Section 2. The scenes that were cut away. Cape Fear is one of the most loved episodes the show ever made. It first aired during the 5th season, and it brings back Sideshow Bob, the tall, sneering villain with the wild hair who keeps trying to get rid of Bart. The whole episode is built like an old scary movie, with Bob stalking the family until they hide away in a houseboat. Somewhere in the middle of all that tension, the show takes a short break and plays one of its little cartoons inside the cartoon. A quick burst of the show that the Simpson kids love to watch. The one starring a mouse and a cat who do terrible things to each other. That short cartoon in Cape Fear is the one most people remember as the laser trap. The cat, Scratchy, gets caught in a slow, fancy trap built by the mouse, Itchy, the kind of trap a villain in a spy film might use. A laser slides closer and closer, and the audience waits for the cat to wriggle free the way he sometimes does. He does not. The laser slices the poor cat into dozens of neat little pieces, and the short cartoon simply stops there and the episode moves on. For most people, that is the whole joke, and it already feels a little darker than usual. What almost no one watching at home in those years knew is that the cartoon was meant to keep going. In the version that got written and drawn first, Itchy does not walk away after slicing the cat apart. He sweeps up all the little pieces with a dustpan, calmly sews the cat back together until he is whole again, and then hands him a giant hospital bill for the work. The cat looks at the enormous price and his face falls. He is crushed by it. The mouse hands him a small gun, and the cat, sunk in misery over the bill, uses it to end his own life right there on screen. That was the original ending. It got cut before the episode ever reached a single home. The reason for the cut is simple enough. The mouse and cat cartoon was always violent in a loud, bouncy, harmless way. The kind of violence that lands like a joke because nothing about it feels real. A sad cat shooting himself over a bill landed in a completely different place. It felt heavy. It felt true in a way that made people stop laughing. The team behind the show decided it crossed a line that even their wildest cartoon should not cross. So they trimmed it back to the laser and let the joke end on a lighter, sillier note. There is a small bonus secret buried in that same episode. Cape Fear ran short when the team put it together, meaning the finished story did not fill the time it was supposed to fill. So the writers stretched things out to make up the gap. The most famous example is the long stretch where Sideshow Bob steps on a row of rakes, one after another, and gets smacked in the face each time, far longer than any normal joke would last. One of the show's writers, Mike Reese, later wrote in a book called Springfield Confidential that several small pieces of the episode were added simply to fill out the running time. The cat and mouse cartoon was one of those time fillers, which means a moment fans treasure today only exists because the episode came up a little short. Every episode of the show faces the same hard limit. A full episode only has about 22 minutes of actual story once the commercials are taken out, and the writers almost always create more than will ever fit, so things get cut. Most of what ends up on the cutting room floor is dull, just a few extra seconds here and there that no one would ever miss. Once in a while, though, a cut takes out something that would have quietly made an episode better, and the loss only becomes clear years later when the people who made it sit down to talk about it. Homer's triple bypass from the 4th season is one of those quiet losses. The story follows Homer as his unhealthy habits habits finally catch up with him and his heart begins to fail. He suffers through a string of heart attacks and is rushed toward a risky surgery to save his life. During one of these frightening moments, the show drifts back through Homer's whole life, all the way to the very beginning, to the hospital room where he was born. In that flashback, Grandpa comes to peek at the brand new baby Homer in the nursery and is baffled to find that the infant has somehow gotten his hands on a whole pizza. The nurse just shrugs at him with no explanation. It is a soft, strange, funny little beat. The episode was built to pay that joke off again right at the end. In the version that was written, after Homer survives his surgery and the danger is past, he is shown happily eating a pizza once more, with the cheese stretching out of his mouth in long, gooey strings. Marge turns to the nurse and asks the very same question Grandpa had asked all those years before, wanting to know how on earth Homer got a pizza in there. And the nurse gives the very same shrug. The beginning and the end of Homer's life, the nursery and the recovery room, would have rhymed with each other through one simple repeated joke. That closing scene was cut. One of the show's leaders, Al Jean, talked about this years later and admitted he was surprised to find the ending gone. He compared the gap it left behind to a leftover body part that no longer does anything, a piece that used to connect to something but now just hangs there with its purpose missing. The opening joke about baby Homer and the pizza still plays in the finished episode, yet it no longer leads anywhere. It was the setup for a payoff that never arrives, because the payoff was quietly removed, leaving a tiny invisible hole that most people feel without ever knowing why. Cuts like that are scattered all through the show's long history, 1 or 2 minutes lost from an episode here and there. None of it compares though to the largest pile of removed footage the show ever produced. For that, the story moves away from the weekly episodes and over to the one time The Simpsons left television and went to the big screen. The Simpsons movie came out in 2007 after years of work. A film is a much bigger job than a single episode, and the team wrote, drew, and reworked an enormous amount of material trying to get the story right. They tried whole versions of scenes, then threw them out and tried again. They changed the plot, changed who mattered, changed how characters connected to each other, over and over, until they landed on the film that finally reached theaters. What got left behind in the process is genuinely hard to picture. According to the people who made it, talking about it on the home video release, around an hour and a half of footage was fully drawn and finished and colored, completely ready to be watched, and then never used. On top of that, there was another hour and a half of material that only ever existed as rough, unfinished sketches that never got fully drawn out. Added together, that comes to roughly 3 hours of cut content. The film itself runs about an hour and a half, so The Simpsons threw away enough finished and half-finished work to fill 2 more movies, and almost none of it has ever been seen. The pieces that got cut were not only small jokes either. Some of them would have changed the whole shape of the story. In one early version of the film, the character who falls for Lisa, her sweet young love interest, was not a new boy at all. It was Milhouse, her nervous blue-haired classmate who has carried a hopeless crush on her for years. In another version, the big moment in the church, where a member of the family receives a frightening warning from above about a coming disaster, did not happen to Grandpa at all. It happened to Marge. Small changes like these ripple outward and touch everything, which means the movie that millions of people watched is only one of several very different movies that could have existed, each one sitting finished or half-finished in a vault somewhere. Only a tiny sliver of all that lost footage was ever shared with the public. Just under 5 minutes of cut scenes were tucked onto the home video release as bonus material, little glimpses of what might have been. The rest, the hours and hours of work, the alternate love stories and the alternate warnings, and whatever else was dreamed up and dropped, stays out of sight. It exists. It was real. It was drawn by hand and recorded and finished. And for the most part, no one outside the building has ever laid eyes on it. Taken all together, the show and its movie hold almost as much hidden in their trash as they ever showed on the screen. A cat who was meant to die a sad death and was spared one. A pizza joke that lost its other half. A young blue-haired boy who almost got the girl. 3 lost hours of a single film. The story everyone knows turns out to be only the surface, the part that survived, while a whole second version floats just underneath it, cut loose and quietly forgotten. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Yet not everything strange the show hid was thrown away. Some of it stayed right inside the finished episodes that aired, in plain view on television for years. There was one secret in particular that the writers built quietly across many different episodes and many different seasons. A hidden thing that never got cut at all. It played out a little at a time in tiny scraps spread across the show, where only the most patient and watchful person could ever gather the pieces and slowly fit them back together into the full picture they were always always meant to form. Section 3. The whole movie hiding inside the show. Buried inside the show, spread out over years, sits a complete action movie that almost no one was ever meant to fully notice. It stars a character named Rainier Wolfcastle, a giant slab of a man with a square jaw, bulging muscles, and a thick foreign accent. Inside the world of the show, Wolfcastle is a famous movie star, the kind of action hero who shoots a room full of bad guys and then says a cheesy one-liner over their bodies. He is a gentle poke at the huge, muscle-bound action stars who ruled movie theaters in those years, the most obvious being Arnold Schwarzenegger. His voice comes from Harry Shearer, one of the small handful of actors who played dozens of the show's characters. And Wolfcastle's most famous role is a tough, angry cop named McBain. The McBain clips show up the way background jokes usually do. Homer might flop down on the couch and flip on the television, and there will be McBain for a few seconds, growling at someone or blowing something up. The family might wander into a video store, and a McBain film will be playing on a screen in the corner. Each clip lasts only a moment before the real story of the episode pulls the focus back. On their own, the clips look like nothing more than quick throwaway gags, a little spice in the background that the family barely reacts to. Lining those clips up changes everything. When every McBain scene from the early years is collected and placed in the right order, the scattered scraps stop being random. They join together into one full action movie with a clear beginning, middle, and end. The whole thing runs only about 4 minutes once stitched together, yet those 4 minutes were sliced apart and sprinkled across roughly 50 episodes spanning 3 different seasons. A viewer watching week to week, year to year, would have no reason to suspect that all these little bursts were chapters of a single hidden story quietly being told underneath the show they thought they were watching. The story begins in a second season episode. McBain, a hard-nosed cop, has uncovered proof that a powerful politician named Senator Mendoza is secretly running a drug ring. He marches in and tells his boss what he has found, expecting the law to come down on Mendoza. Instead, his boss turns on him and forces him off the police force. McBain, furious, answers the betrayal in the most McBain way possible, by hurling his boss straight through an office window. That is where the first piece ends, and the episode rolls on with the Simpson family, leaving the cop story frozen midair. A later clip, also from the second season, picks the thread back up. McBain sits in a diner with his longtime partner, a friendly older cop named Scoey. Scoey is close to retiring, talking about the peaceful life waiting for him once he hangs up his badge, the way characters always do right before something terrible happens to them. Behind the counter, the man serving them food is not really a waiter at all. He is an assassin sent to kill McBain. The gunman opens fire, and the bullet meant for McBain hits Scoey instead. As the old cop lies dying in his partner's arms, he uses his final breath to give one last order, telling McBain to get Mendoza, no matter what it takes. The clip ends. The episode moves on. Another piece, again from the same stretch of the show, carries the revenge forward. Now McBain is back on the hunt, and he decides the gun he has been using is far too small for the job ahead of him. He trades up for a much bigger, far more ridiculous weapon. His captain, seeing the enormous gun, scolds him about it, the way a stern boss always lectures the loose cannon hero in these kinds of films. McBain does not particularly care. The pieces keep coming like this across the seasons, each one a few seconds long, each one nudging the revenge story a little further down the road, while the family in the foreground goes about completely unrelated lives. The ending arrives in a 4th season episode, well over a year of real time after the story first began. McBain finally corners Senator Mendoza for their last showdown. After everything, the chase, the murdered partner, the bigger gun, the cop gets his man. He throws Mendoza out of a towering skyscraper, and the villain plunges all the way down before landing on a tanker truck conveniently filled with gasoline, which erupts into a massive fireball. The bad guy is finished. Justice, McBain style, is served. With that explosion, the hidden movie quietly reaches its end. Scattered final scene resting inside an episode that, on the surface, had nothing to do with any of it. Stepping back from the pieces and seeing the whole shape of the thing is where the wonder sets in. A complete little movie, with a murdered partner and a corrupt politician and a revenge quest and a fiery finish, was filmed, chopped into tiny fragments, and slipped into the background of dozens of unrelated episodes over the course of 3 years. The people making the show kept the thread alive in their heads across all that time, dropping the next chapter into place whenever the chance came up, trusting that the story would still hold together for anyone patient enough to dig it out much later. A fair question hangs over all of this. Was the hidden movie built on purpose, or did it only come together by luck? The honest answer sits somewhere in the middle, and the people who made the show have said so. One of the show's leaders, Al Jean, has explained that the McBain story really was pitched as a connected idea by a small group of the early writers, himself included, tied to one particular episode episode's script, so the connection was planted with intent. At the same time, the writers have also admitted that part of the reason the fragments line up so neatly is that they were all simply making fun of the same kind of cookie-cutter tough cop movie, the sort where the plot always follows the same predictable path. Spoof enough of those generic stories, and the parts naturally start fitting together, almost on their own. So the hidden movie is both a real plan and a happy accident, stitched from intention and coincidence at the same time. The layers of pretend stacked inside the joke make it even stranger. Wolfcastle is treated as a real working actor inside the show, a celebrity who simply plays the part of McBain, the same way a real movie star plays a role and then takes the costume off. His accent is thick and clumsy, his action lines are gloriously corny, and the show loves letting him deliver a stiff little catchphrase right after some over-the-top stunt. The hidden movie, then, is a fake movie starring a fake actor playing a fake cop hidden inside a cartoon, assembled out of fragments by viewers decades after the fact. Few jokes have ever been folded that many times. For most of the show's life, hardly anyone realized the full movie was there. The clips played, people chuckled at the silly muscle man, and the seasons rolled on. Then, many years later, fans online began collecting the scattered McBain scenes and posting them lined up in their proper order, letting people watch the complete 4-minute story for the very first time in one sitting. The reaction spread quickly, with longtime viewers stunned that something so big had been sitting under their noses the whole time, hidden in plain view across episodes they had watched again and again. After it spread, the people who made the show confirmed that the pieces truly had been meant to connect, settling any doubt that the buried movie was real. There is something quietly bold about a show willing to do that, tucking a full story into the cracks of dozens of episodes, knowing that the overwhelming majority of viewers would never piece it together, was a bet placed on the small number of people who would care enough to look. No big announcement was ever made. No episode ever stopped to point at the clips and explain the trick. The movie simply existed, waiting in fragments, patient for as long as it took, rewarding only the kind of viewer willing to treat a background gag as something worth chasing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That sort of patience, though, asks a lot. A hidden movie spread across 3 seasons takes real effort to uncover, the work of someone hunting through dozens of episodes with the order written down. Not every secret the show buried demanded that much digging. One of the most precise hidden details of all sat in a completely different place, not scattered across the years, but pressed into the one short stretch of footage that played at the very start of nearly every single episode. It flashed by in well under a second, a small string of numbers most people never even tried to read, and yet those numbers were chosen with great care to mean something exact and a little bit sad about real life outside the show. Section 4. The number hiding in the opening. The opening of the show is one of the most watched stretches of film in television history. It is played at the start of episode after episode for over 30 years, seen by hundreds of millions of people across the world. So familiar that most viewers can hum the music and picture every beat with their eyes shut. Bart scribbling lines on the school chalkboard. Lisa playing her saxophone. Homer leaving work with something glowing and dangerous stuck to his back. The whole family racing home from different directions and tumbling onto the couch together. The pieces shuffle around a little from episode to episode, yet the heart of it stays the same. A small, comforting routine that signals the show is about to begin. Some parts of that routine change every single time, while others almost never do. The line Bart writes on the chalkboard is different in nearly every episode, and the gag waiting for the family when they reach the couch is rewritten constantly, so those 2 corners of the opening stay fresh. The rest of it, though, holds steady. The walk home, the music, the familiar shots of the town, and the quick stop at the grocery store play out the same way again and again. That steadiness matters more than it seems, because a secret tucked into a part of the opening that never changes can ride along quietly for decades, repeated so often that it stops being noticed at all. Tucked inside that routine is a quick stop at the grocery store. Marge is shown at the checkout counter with a cart full of food, doing the most ordinary errand in the world. Baby Maggie, who is supposed to be sitting safely in the cart, has instead climbed up onto the moving belt where the groceries go. Caught up among the cans and boxes, she slides toward the checkout scanner and gets passed right over it by mistake, beeped through like a carton of milk or a bag of apples. The register lights up with a price for the baby, and a second later Maggie pops up out of a paper shopping bag, perfectly fine, while Marge gives a small, startled gasp. The gag goes by in a blink, played for a quick laugh about a clumsy moment at the store. The little moment is built with a clean, simple rhythm. Maggie rides along the belt with the food, the scanner beeps as it reads her like any other item, the register flashes its total, and then the baby turns up safe and sound inside a bag, ready to be carried home with the shopping. The joke lands instantly, even for the youngest viewer, because the sight of a baby treated like a box of cereal is funny all on its own. Nothing about the scene asks asks anyone to look closer. It simply moves on, the way the opening always does, hurrying toward the couch and the start of the episode. The number on the register gets less than a heartbeat of screen time before it is gone. The price that flashes on that register, though, holds a quiet secret most people never slow down enough to read. In the older version of the opening, the number that appears when Maggie is scanned is $847.63. That is a strangely exact figure for a joke. A made-up number for a gag would usually be something round and silly, a big goofy total picked at random. This one carries 4 specific digits in a careful decimal, the kind of precise number that comes from somewhere real. It does come from somewhere real. The creator of the show, Matt Groening, has explained that the price was chosen on purpose. $847.63 was, at the time the show began in the late 1980s, about the average amount of money it cost to raise a child in the United States for one single month. The number was pulled from real life and slipped into a cartoon, hidden in plain sight inside a joke about a baby getting scanned at the store. Sitting with that for a moment reveals how clever and a little bit sad the joke really is. On the surface, it is a cute mishap, a baby accidentally rung up at the register. Underneath, there's a sharper point waiting for anyone who reads the number and knows what it means. A baby is being treated like a grocery item, given a price tag and beeped through the scanner. And the price is the actual real-world cost of having that baby for a month. The gag is gently telling the truth about how expensive children are, dressed up as a throwaway bit of slapstick. A grown-up paying attention, especially one who had recently looked at the cost of raising their own kids, might feel that number land in a way a child watching never would. That difference is part of what made the show special from the very start. A small joke like this works on 2 completely separate levels at the same time. A young viewer sees a funny baby in a shopping bag and giggles. An older viewer who pauses on the screen sees a sly comment about the price of family life, aimed squarely at adults, and even at the kind of person who pays close attention to money and numbers. The same 3 seconds of cartoon delivers a silly visual joke and a quiet, grown-up truth, with neither one getting in the way of the other. The number could not stay frozen forever, of course. Years rolled by, and the real cost of raising a child kept climbing, the way prices always do over time. A figure that had been accurate in the late 1980s slowly drifted out of date, becoming a snapshot of a moment that no longer matched the world outside. So when the show updated its opening years later, around the end of the 2000s, the team behind it changed the joke to keep it fresh. The opening itself has been rebuilt more than once across the show's long life. The first version was made when the show began, then lightly reworked a year or so later, and then completely remade around the end of the 2000s, when the show moved to a sharper, clearer picture for newer televisions. The grocery scan survived through all those early years untouched, the same exact price flashing on the register episode after episode, season after season. It was only when the opening was fully rebuilt for that sharper version that the famous number was finally retired and replaced. A figure that had sat in the opening since the very beginning gave way to a new one, quietly closing the book on the original gag after 2 decades of repetition. In the newer version of the opening, the trick works a little differently. Before Maggie reaches the scanner, Marge's pile of groceries already adds up to a total on the register, $243.26. Then the baby slides across the scanner and the price on screen doubles, jumping to $486.52. The exact real-world figure from the old version is gone, replaced by a simpler and more lasting idea. A child does not cost one specific number anymore. A child simply doubles the bill. The joke shifted from a precise fact about one particular year into a feeling any parent in any year would understand. The sense that a kid roughly doubles whatever life used to cost. Even that doubled number rewards a careful eye. The team did not just slap any random total on the screen. They picked one figure for the groceries and then made the second figure land at exactly twice the first, so that scanning the baby cleanly doubles the cost down to the last cent. The math is tidy on purpose. A viewer who freezes a screen and checks the 2 numbers will find that they line up perfectly. A small hidden bit of care folded into a joke that lasts barely a second on screen. The register has not always shown a price at all. Over the long life of the show, the writers have now and then swapped the number out for a different joke entirely, turning that little checkout screen into a spot for one-off gags. The most pointed of these came in a special episode from the 7th season, an episode built entirely around showing the audience the show's own behind-the-scenes secrets and hidden tricks. In that episode, the scanner is shown reading a message made of letters instead of a price, spelling out the letters NRA 4EVER. The episode plays this as a joke about a long-running gag that the show's creators are secretly stuffing the program with sneaky political messages from the far right. The narrator points it out with a wink, pretending to expose one of hundreds of supposed hidden messages slipped in by Matt Groening himself. The whole thing is a joke about the idea of hidden messages, hidden inside an actual hidden message, in the very part of the show where hidden things tend to live. That special episode was hosted by Troy McClure, the washed-up movie actor character the show used whenever it wanted a smooth, phony voice to guide the audience through something. The whole half hour was a celebration of the show looking back at itself, walking viewers through its own history, its cut material, and its little tricks. Slipping the strange register message into that particular episode was a perfect fit, because the entire point of the episode was pulling back the curtain on the show's own games. The joke about secret political messages had been floating around for years, a teasing accusation that the creators were hiding their views in the background, and the show leaned into it by pretending to confess, turning the suspicion itself into one more gag for the steady checkout screen to carry. Another swap turned up in one of the show's yearly scary Halloween episodes, the run of spooky specials the show has done for decades. In that version of the opening, fittingly dark for the occasion, the scanner does not bother with money or letters. It simply reads the number 666, the number long tied to evil and the devil in scary stories. The Halloween specials have always loved twisting the familiar opening into something stranger and darker to match their creepy mood, reworking the couch gag and the music and the look of the town for one frightening night a year. Turning the baby's price tag into the devil's number was a small, perfect piece of that tradition. A creepy little touch dropped into the same 3 seconds that usually hides a number about the cost of diapers and baby food. What ties all of these together is the spot they chose to hide them in. The grocery store scan sits inside the opening, the single most repeated piece of footage the show has. The part that plays before nearly every episode and gets seen more times than almost any scene in television. Hiding a secret there is a strange and bold choice. A clever detail buried in one random episode might be found by a few sharp-eyed fans. A detail buried in the opening is shown to every single viewer every single time and still slips past almost all of them, because the brain stops really looking at something it has seen 1,000 times. The opening became invisible through sheer repetition, which made it the perfect hiding place. The secret was never locked away in some dark corner. It was held up in front of everyone over and over, trusting that familiarity would do the work of hiding it. For a very long time, the trick worked almost perfectly. In the early years, catching that number meant owning a way to record the show and being willing to freeze the tape at exactly the right instant, then squinting at a tiny, blurry total. Few people ever bothered, so the meaning behind the figure stayed a small piece of knowledge passed quietly among the most devoted fans. Later, as it became easy to pause any moment cleanly and to look up almost anything, the explanation behind the number began to spread. People froze the picture, read the price, searched for what it meant, and shared the answer with one another, until a detail built to stay hidden slowly turned into one of the better-known small facts about the show. The secret that had once required real effort to uncover became something a curious person can learn in seconds, even though it still flashes by, as quick and easy to miss as ever for anyone simply watching along. The number also says something about who the show thought it was talking to. A cartoon about a yellow family could easily have aimed everything at children, keeping every joke loud and simple and safe. Instead, right there in the opening, the writers planted a joke that only a grown-up could fully catch. A quiet nod to the real cost of raising a kid, the kind of thing a tired parent watching beside their child might notice and smile at while the child saw only a baby in a bag. The show was speaking to two audiences at once from its very first seconds, the children watching the bright moving pictures and the adults reading the small print, and it trusted both of them to take what they could. Most viewers, year after year, took only the surface. They saw Maggie pop up out of the shopping bag, heard Marge gasp, and felt the warm, familiar rhythm of the opening carry them into the episode, never once reading the price on the register or wondering why it looked so oddly specific. The deeper joke sat there the whole time, patient and quiet, waiting for the rare person who would freeze the picture, squint at the tiny glowing number, and go looking for the reason it was there. And for the ones who did look, a simple grocery gag turned into a small, sharp truth about money, family, and the real weight of the ordinary life the show was gently making fun of. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Numbers, names, and cutscenes are one kind of secret, the kind made of details and choices. The show once hid something far bigger and far stranger inside a single episode, something that had nothing to do with a clever drawing or a careful figure. For one episode, the show hid a real person, one of the most famous singers who ever lived, a voice almost everyone on the planet would recognize in a an instant. His true name was kept out of the credits and swapped for a fake one. His part in the show buried as a deliberate secret, and the truth about who he really was stayed hidden from the public for years after the episode first aired. Section 5. The famous voice nobody was allowed to name. Guest stars were never rare on the show. Over the years, all sorts of famous people have lent their voices to it, playing themselves or made-up characters, and the credits at the end always proudly listed their real names so the audience would know exactly who had stopped by. One early episode broke that rule completely. It hid its most famous guest behind a fake name, kept the truth a secret for years, and built one of the strangest layered tricks the show has ever pulled off, all around a voice that almost everyone on Earth would know in a heartbeat. The episode is called Stark Raving Dad, and it opened the show's third season back in the autumn of 1991. The story starts with a small laundry accident. Bart tosses a red hat in with a load of Homer's white work shirts, and the wash turns every shirt a bright shade of pink. Homer, having nothing else to wear, heads off to his job at the power plant in a pink shirt. Between the odd clothing and a silly answer he gives on a workplace test, the people in charge decide Homer must be out of his mind. He gets carted off to a hospital for people who are struggling with their minds, the kind of place with locked doors and worried doctors. Inside that hospital, Homer is given a roommate, and the roommate is where the magic of the episode lives. He is a very large white man, calm and kind and soft-spoken, and he is completely convinced that he is the pop superstar Michael Jackson. He talks in Jackson's gentle, breathy voice. He moves with that same shy sweetness. Homer, who somehow has no idea who Michael Jackson even is, simply accepts his new friend at face value, while everyone else in the hospital marvels at the big man who believes he is the most famous singer in the world. The character has a real name and a real history in the story. He is not actually Michael Jackson at all. He is a man named Leon Kompowski, a bricklayer from a town in New Jersey, an ordinary worker who spent most of his life angry and unhappy. One day, by chance, he started speaking in Michael Jackson's voice, and something changed. People around him began to smile. They treated him warmly. The world softened toward him. So he kept doing it, holding on to the gentle voice because of the kindness it brought him, until he ended up in the hospital, still wrapped in the comfort of a borrowed sound. Most of the heart of the episode comes from the bond between Leon and Bart. Bart has forgotten to get his sister Lisa anything for her birthday, and he is panicking about it. Leon, with all his calm warmth, helps the boy out, teaching him that the best gift is something made with care rather than something bought. Together, they write Lisa a birthday song, a sweet, simple tune put together just for her. The song becomes the soft, emotional center of the whole story, a quiet act of kindness from a sad man pretending to be someone famous, passed along to a worried kid trying to make things right with his sister. The ending brings a gentle twist inside the story itself. Leon finally drops the Michael Jackson voice and speaks in his real one, a plain, deep, completely ordinary sounding voice. Nothing like the superstar at all. He admits the truth, that he never was Michael Jackson, only a man who found that sounding like him made the world a friendlier place. The reveal is touching rather than shocking, a reminder that the kindness Leon brought to people was real, even if the famous identity was not. The far bigger reveal sat outside the story, behind the scenes, where the real secret was buried. The gentle Michael Jackson voice that Leon speaks in throughout the episode was not an impression by some hired actor. It was Michael Jackson, the actual real Michael Jackson. The biggest music star on the planet at the time, quietly came in and voiced the speaking parts of the character himself. He was a genuine fan of the show, and the story goes that he simply called up the people who made it and offered to appear. The call was so unexpected that the team could hardly believe the voice on the other end truly belonged to him. Getting him onto the show, though, came with a strange catch. Michael Jackson was tied up in deals with his record company, and those deals would not allow him to officially appear on the program under his own name. So the show found a way around it. When the credits rolled at the end of the episode, the guest who voiced Leon was listed not as Michael Jackson, but under a completely made-up name, John J. Smith. The most recognizable entertainer in the world had performed in one of the most popular shows in the world, and his name was deliberately hidden from the very list meant to announce it. The disguise went even deeper than the fake name. Because of the same record company rules, Michael Jackson was allowed to speak as the character, but was not allowed to sing as the character. The episode needed singing, especially for the birthday song made for Lisa. So the show brought in a second performer, a man named Kip Lennon, whose special talent was sounding almost exactly like Michael Jackson. Jackson handled the talking, Lennon handled the singing, doing his best Michael Jackson imitation. The result is a dizzying stack of pretending. A character who is pretending to be Michael Jackson, voiced for his speaking lines by by the real Michael Jackson, who is not allowed to be named as Michael Jackson, with his singing voice provided by another man pretending to be Michael Jackson. Layer upon layer of disguise, all folded into one gentle character in one episode of a cartoon. Why a man of his fame would bother doing all of this, for no credit and no public glory, comes down to the simple fact that he loved the show. He did it for fun, as a fan, happy to slip in quietly behind a fake name and a borrowed singing voice. There was reportedly a playful side to it too, a sense that he enjoyed the secret of it, the idea of being there without anyone officially knowing. He gave one of the most beloved early episodes its soul, and asked for nothing in return except the joke of staying hidden. For a long stretch of years, the truth stayed exactly that, hidden. Fans whispered that the voice sounded just like Michael Jackson, because of course it did, but the show would not confirm it, and the fake name in the credits gave nothing away. The mystery hung in the air, a rumor too perfect to be sure of. Only later, well after the episode had aired and become a favorite, did the people behind the show finally confirm what so many had suspected. The voice really had been Michael Jackson all along. The made-up John J. Smith had been him the entire time. That confirmation turned the episode into a treasured piece of the show's history. A secret guest of that size, hidden so cleverly and revealed so long after, was the kind of story fans love to share. Proof of how strange and special the show's early years had been. For decades, Stark Raving Dad held a warm place in people's memories. The episode with the gentle giant, the homemade birthday song, and the secret superstar buried in the credits under a name that never existed. Then, many years later, everything around the episode changed. In the year 2019, a documentary came out called Leaving Neverland, which laid out serious and disturbing accusations against Michael Jackson, claiming he had harmed children. The accusations were heavy enough and detailed enough that they shifted how a great many people felt about the man and his legacy. And that shift reached all the way back to a cartoon episode that had aired nearly 30 years earlier. The people who run the show made a difficult choice. Rather than keep showing an episode built so completely around Michael Jackson's voice, his presence woven through nearly every scene, they decided to pull it from circulation altogether. One of the show's leaders, James L. Brooks, explained that after watching the documentary, taking the episode out of rotation felt like the only choice they could make. He said the other people he worked with, including Matt Groening, all felt the same way, of one mind on something they normally would have argued over for hours. The episode was removed from the reruns that play on television, kept off the places where the show streams, and left out of the show's official collections going forward. So a once celebrated episode became a kind of ghost. Stark Raving Dad had spent decades as a fan favorite, a clever secret to be proud of, and then almost overnight it turned into an episode that is genuinely hard to find through normal means, quietly set aside and no longer shown. The very thing that made it special, the hidden voice of one of the most famous people alive, became the exact reason it could no longer be aired. The secret that had once been a delight ended up being the weight that sank the whole episode out of sight. There is something heavy in how that story closed. A hidden guest meant as a joyful little prank, a gift from a fan who loved the show, eventually became a thing the show felt it had to bury. The episode still exists. It was still made. Millions of people still remember the gentle voice and the homemade birthday song. Yet the official path to watching it has been gently shut. The episode folded away like a photograph turned face down, present but no longer on display. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Locking an episode away because of who was hidden inside it is one kind of disappearance, driven by a person and a reputation. The show once made a different and even sadder kind of disappearance, where a beloved episode had to be pulled not because of anyone who worked on it, but because of something terrible that happened out in the real world on a single morning that changed an entire country. A much-loved trip the family once took to a famous city suddenly became impossible to keep showing, and for years that episode quietly vanished from television too. Section 6. The trip to New York the show had to hide. The 9th season of the show opened in the autumn of 1997 with an episode about a very ordinary problem blown up to a ridiculous size. The family car goes missing, and getting it back turns into a giant adventure. The episode is called The City of New York vs. Homer Simpson, and for years it was simply a funny, warm, well-made trip away from Springfield. The kind of episode where the family leaves their little town and bumbles around somewhere famous. Almost no one watching it back then could have guessed that this cheerful half hour would one day become something the show felt it could no longer show. The idea came from one of the writers, a man named Ian Maxtone Graham, who had once lived in New York himself. He knew the special headache of a car going missing in that city, the towing, the tickets, the maze of getting it back, and he thought it was a perfect everyday disaster to to drop the family into. The writers in charge, Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein, then had to pick the exact spot where the lost car would end up. They wanted somewhere instantly recognizable, a place anyone in the country would know the moment they saw it. So they chose the wide-open plaza that sat on the ground between the two towers of the World Trade Center, the pair of enormous buildings that stood over downtown New York. The plaza between the towers struck them as the perfect place to strand Homer's car. Getting the city right became a real mission for the people drawing the show. The team wanted New York to feel true, not like a vague cartoon backdrop, so they put in serious work to copy the real place. One of the show's animators, David Silverman, was actually sent to Manhattan in person to walk around and take hundreds of photographs of the streets and buildings, including the area right around the towers. Those photos became the basis for a careful, detailed cartoon version of the city. The towers themselves were drawn with attention and care, standing tall over the animated streets, because the whole back half of the episode would unfold in their shadow. The story that sets everything in motion starts, as so many do, at Moe's Tavern. Homer and his friends have been drinking, and Moe insists that one of them has to stay sober to drive everyone home safely. The unlucky job falls to Barney, the town's hopeless drunk, who is so miserable about being the responsible one for a night that he ends up taking Homer's car on a wild journey all the way to downtown New York. There, he abandons it, leaving it parked in the plaza between the two towers. The car sits there for weeks, collecting parking tickets and eventually getting locked in place with a heavy metal clamp on its wheel, until the family finally learns where it is and makes the long trip to bring it home. Once the family reaches the city, the episode splits into two threads, and both of them live in the world of those towers. Homer gets stuck guarding the car down in the plaza, trapped at the base of the two enormous buildings, growing more and more desperate as he waits, while a simple need to find a bathroom slowly drives him out of his mind. Marge and the children, meanwhile, head off to enjoy the brighter side of New York, seeing the sights and soaking up the city. The towers loom over nearly the entire second half of the episode, the constant backdrop to Homer's misery and the family's fun, woven so deeply into the story that they are almost impossible to separate from it. The towers were not just scenery either. They were part of the jokes. In one moment, two men lean out of windows high up in the separate towers and bicker across the gap between the buildings, with one of them shouting that the other tower is where they keep all the unpleasant people. Homer spends ages stuck between the two giant buildings, looking up at them, circling the plaza, tangled in the strange little world at their feet. The buildings were treated with the show's usual cheerful disrespect, used as a playground for silly gags, the way the show used every famous place it visited. Nothing about it carried any weight at the time. They were simply two big famous buildings, perfect for a comedy about a lost car. The episode turned out to be a strong one. Audiences enjoyed the family's chaotic visit and a musical number in the episode, a goofy song set in a celebrity recovery clinic called You're Checkin' In, was good enough to win the show a major television award for its music and lyrics. The episode also marked the first appearance of Duffman, the loud beer mascot who would pop up again for years afterward. For about 4 years after it aired, the episode lived a completely normal life, playing in the regular rotation of repeats, watched and enjoyed, just another solid entry in the long run of the show, a happy little time capsule of a carefree trip to New York. Then came the morning of September the 11th, 2001. On that day, the two towers of the World Trade Center were destroyed in a terrible attack, and thousands of people lost their lives. The buildings that had stood over downtown New York, the same buildings the show had so carefully drawn and so cheerfully made fun of, were simply gone. The event shook the entire country and changed how people felt about countless things large and small, including the images they saw on their screens. The sight of those towers, once an ordinary part of the skyline, suddenly carried an almost unbearable weight. That weight landed squarely on the episode. An entire half hour of comedy had been built around the towers, with the buildings appearing in shot after shot and serving as the setting for the whole second half of the story. There was no gentle way to keep showing it. The towers were not a quick background detail that could be ignored. They were the stage the episode stood on. So the people who controlled the repeats quietly pulled the City of New York versus Homer Simpson out of rotation across the United States. It stopped airing. A beloved, award-winning episode vanished from television, set aside out of respect and out of the simple, painful awkwardness of showing those buildings used as a joke so soon after such loss. For several years, the episode mostly stayed gone, at least in its home country. Slowly, as time passed and the rawness of the tragedy softened, it began to return. By around 2006, the episode came back to the repeats in some areas, but it came back changed. The versions that aired had been cut. Outdoor shots in the towers were trimmed away. Spoken references to them were removed. The joke about one tower being where they keep all the unpleasant people was taken out. A line one of the show's own leaders, Bill Oakley, later admitted he regretted. Even another gag, a sharp moment at the Statue of Liberty where Bart shouts at a boatload of newcomers that the country is full, got snipped in some versions. Oddly enough, some of these cuts made the episode feel rougher rather than softer, leaving strange gaps where jokes used to smooth things over. The result was a patchwork, an episode that existed in several different forms depending on where and when a person watched it. In the United States, edited versions became the norm, with the towers carefully avoided. In other countries, like Australia and Canada, the episode often kept playing in its full, original form for years, towers and all, and anyone who owned the proper home video collection of that season could still watch the whole thing exactly as it first aired, untouched, the towers standing tall in every original shot. So the episode never truly disappeared. It simply scattered into versions, whole in some places, trimmed in others, present and absent at the same time. Even now, long after it returned, it remains one of the most rarely shown episodes the series ever made. It is worth being clear that there was never anything strange or mysterious about why the towers were in the episode. Over the years, some people online have tried to spin the whole thing into a spooky tale, as if the show somehow knew what was coming. The truth is far simpler and far more human. The writers needed a famous New York landmark to lose a car at, and the towers were one of the most famous landmarks in the world, so they used them, the same way they would have used any other well-known spot. Bill Oakley, who helped guide the episode, has patiently explained as much, pointing out that there was nothing behind it beyond ordinary choices made for ordinary reasons. The buildings ended up in the episode because they were big and famous, and for no deeper reason than that. The most moving part of the whole story came years later, and it turned the episode's history gently around. In 2019, one of the original hand-drawn pictures from the episode, a drawing showing the two towers standing side by side, was given as a gift to the National September 11th Memorial and Museum, the place built in New York to remember the attack and honor the people who died. The museum accepted it, and one of the people in charge of the collection described the gift as both funny and touching at once. So a cheerful cartoon drawing of the towers, made for a silly comedy about a lost car, ended up resting in the very place dedicated to remembering them. The joke and the memorial became part of the same story. There is something quietly beautiful in that ending. An episode made in complete innocence, with no idea of what the future held, was first turned into something too painful to show, then carefully edited, then slowly allowed back, and finally given a small place of honor in the museum built to remember the real loss. The drawing that had once been part of a throwaway gag became a tender object, a reminder of a time before everything changed. The episode now lives a double life. It is still a funny half hour about a family chasing down a towed car, and it is also a gentle keepsake of two buildings and a more carefree world that no longer exist. Both of these vanished episodes, the one hidden because of who was inside it, and the one hidden because of what happened to the world outside it, were taken away for reasons that had nothing to do with the quality of the work. They were good episodes, loved episodes, and they were set aside anyway, pulled out of sight by things no writer could have planned for. The show could only watch as the world around it reached back in time and changed what its old episodes meant. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Not every hidden thing in the show carries that kind of sadness, though. Most of the secrets the writers buried were placed there purely for fun, packed into single frames so quickly that they flash past in less than a blink. The show became famous for cramming tiny jokes into the background, jokes written in small print on signs and posters and labels, sitting on screen for a fraction of a second, far too fast for anyone to read while simply watching along. The writers hid them on purpose, knowing full well that only the rare person willing to freeze the picture and lean in close would ever catch them, planting little rewards in the corners of the screen for the patient few who would go looking. Section 7. The jokes hidden in a single blink. The show built its whole town to be paused. Tucked into the background of nearly every scene are tiny jokes written in small print, on shop signs, on billboards, on the front of buildings, on the labels of products, and on the marquees outside the church and the movie theater. These little jokes flash across the screen for barely a second, far too quick to read while simply watching along at normal speed. They were placed there on purpose by people who knew that most viewers would never catch them, planted like coins dropped in the grass for the rare person willing to stop, back up, and look closely. This habit was unusual for its time, and the people making making the show were proud of it. When the program began, a new kind of machine had just become common in homes, the video recorder, the box that let people record shows onto tapes and then pause them or rewind them whenever they wanted. Before that, a joke written on a background sign would have been useless, gone in a flash with no way to ever read it. The show treated the new machine as a gift. The writers started cramming the screen with extra jokes that only made sense to someone with a finger on the pause button, betting that a small, devoted group of fans would slow the picture down and hunt for the hidden bits. It became one of the first shows to truly play with that idea, leaning into the freeze frame as a place to hide treasure. An early sign of this trust in the pause button showed up right in the opening of the show. Starting around the second season, the opening was changed to include a quick, swooping shot that races past a whole crowd of the show's side characters, all the smaller faces from around town. At normal speed, the shot is a blur, a smear of color that the eye cannot pick apart. Only by slowing it down, going through it picture by picture, can a viewer freeze on each character and recognize who is there. The show was, in a sense, daring its audience to stop and look, hiding a crowd of familiar faces inside a moment built to be too fast to see. It set the tone for everything that came after. One of the most loved of these hidden running jokes lives on the sign outside the town church. The church belongs to Reverend Lovejoy, the bored and weary minister, and out front stands a notice board with a changeable message, the kind real churches use to post the time of the service or a kind word for the week. In the show, that little sign almost always carries a joke. The message changes from episode to episode, and over the hundreds of episodes the show has made, there have been dozens upon dozens of different lines posted there. Some poke gentle fun at religion. Some comment on whatever is happening in the story. Some are just silly. Each one sits on screen only briefly, easy to miss entirely, rewarding the viewer who happens to glance at the right corner at the right moment, or who freezes the picture to read the fine print. The town newspaper hides a similar trick. Whenever the camera lands on a copy of the Springfield Shopper, the local paper, there is usually a big main headline tied to whatever is going on in the episode. Underneath it though, in smaller print, the writers often slipped in a second headline, a little throwaway joke that has nothing to do with the story and exists purely for anyone reading closely. A serious headline up top, a goofy one hiding below it, a joke folded under a joke. A person watching at normal speed sees only the big words. A person who pauses gets the bonus laugh waiting in the small ones. Springfield itself is packed wall to wall with this kind of wordplay. Walk down any street in the show and the storefronts are covered in punny names and silly signs for businesses that exist only as background decoration. There is the donut shop with its giant statue out front, Lard Lad, and countless other shops, bars, billboards, and posters carrying clever twists of language. Most of them appear for only a moment as the camera passes, never important to the plot, never pointed at or explained. The writers simply filled the town to the brim with jokes, layering them into the scenery so thickly that no single viewing could ever catch them all. The town became a place where the walls themselves were trying to be funny, quietly, in the background, for anyone patient enough to read them. Even the famous chalkboard at the start of the show belongs to this family of hidden gags, though it sits in plain view rather than the deep background. At the beginning of many episodes, Bart is shown writing a line over and over on the school chalkboard as punishment, and the line is different almost every time. Usually it is just a funny sentence. Once in a while, though, the writers use that chalkboard to quietly talk back to the real world. After one episode featured a musical number that poked fun at the city of New Orleans, some people in that city were upset by the unflattering words. The show answered in its own gentle way. In the very next episode, the chalkboard showed Bart writing a line, again and again, promising never to insult New Orleans. It was a tiny, almost hidden apology, tucked into the opening seconds of a cartoon, easy to miss unless a person knew the story behind it. The couch gag at the end of the opening works on the same playful idea, even if it is bigger and easier to spot. Every episode ends its opening with a family rushing to the couch, and every time something different happens when they get there. Sometimes the gag is long and elaborate. Sometimes it is over in an instant, a quick, strange little moment that flickers past before the episode begins. The show turned even this small, repeated beat into a place for endless invention, a tiny gift handed to the audience at the start of each episode, sometimes so brief that it too rewards a second look. Beneath all the puns and signs, some of the hidden jokes reached for something cleverer still. Now and then the writers buried a joke that asked the viewer to actually think, not just read. A background board might hold a math problem with a surprising answer. A scene might tuck in a reference to a famous old book or a clever twist of language, sometimes even a pun that only works if a person knows another language. These were jokes aimed squarely at the sharpest, most curious corner of the audience. The kind of viewer who would not only pause the screen, but would also recognize the deeper layer once they spotted it. The show was willing to write jokes that perhaps only a small handful of people would ever fully get, which is a strange and generous thing for a program watched by millions to bother doing. The reason behind all of this comes down to a kind of respect. The writers treated their audience as smart, curious people who might want to dig, rather than as a crowd to be handed only the simplest, loudest jokes. Hiding a treat in the background that most people would never find was a quiet way of rewarding the ones who cared the most. The rewatchers, the pausers, the fans who watched an episode 5 times and noticed something new on the 5th. It also meant the show held up to repeat viewing in a way few programs do. An episode could be watched again and again, and each time, the screen might give up another small secret that had been sitting there in plain sight the entire time, simply waiting to be noticed. Time changed how visible these hidden jokes were. In the early years, catching a freeze frame gag took real effort and a video recorder and a willingness to wear out the pause button. The jokes truly were hidden then, found only by the most dedicated viewers and shared by word of mouth among fans. Later, as the world moved on to better machines and then to the internet, all of that changed. Suddenly anyone could freeze any moment perfectly, zoom in, study the smallest print, and share what they found with everyone else. The jokes that had once been nearly invisible became easy to collect and pass around. Fans began gathering the church signs, the newspaper headlines, the punny shop names, lining them up and sharing them widely, pulling the hidden layer of the show up into the open where everyone could enjoy it. That shift turned the show into something a little different from what it had been at the start. What began as a private game between the writers and a tiny group of eagle-eyed fans grew into a vast shared treasure hunt with countless people combing through episodes frame by frame, finding jokes the writers had hidden decades earlier. The secrets did not change. The town was always this full, the signs always this clever, the church marquee always carrying its little messages. The only thing that changed was how many people could finally see them. A layer of the show that had been built to stay mostly hidden slowly came fully into the light, and it turned out to be even richer than most fans had ever realized. There is something fitting in the fact that a show this dense with hidden jokes became one of the most rewatched programs in the world. The two things feed each other. The town is so packed with small things to find that no one could ever absorb it all in a single pass, which gives people a reason to come back, and coming back gives the hidden jokes a chance to finally be seen. The writers built Springfield to reward attention, and the audience rewarded that effort by paying attention for decades, pausing and rewinding and laughing at jokes that had waited years for a pair of eyes to land on them. A whole second show lives in the background of the first, made of fine print and quick glances, available to anyone willing to slow down and look. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. All of these hidden jokes belong to the polished, finished version of the show, the bright, confident Springfield that the world came to know so well. That version did not arrive fully formed. Long before the town looked the way it does now, before the family even looked like themselves, The Simpsons existed as something rougher and far stranger, a set of crude little cartoons squeezed into the corners of a completely different program. Those earliest scraps, where the characters were lumpy and oddly drawn and barely recognizable, have mostly faded out of sight, tucked away and rarely shown. The half-forgotten first draft of a family the whole world would later know by heart. Section 8. The lumpy, forgotten first version of the family. The show that the whole world knows did not begin as a show at all. Long before there was a half-hour program, long before Springfield had its familiar shape, long before the family even looked like themselves, The Simpsons lived as a string of tiny, rough little cartoons squeezed into the gaps of a completely different program. These first appearances were crude, strange, and quick, the wobbly first draft of a family that millions of people would one day know by heart. Most fans alive today have never seen a single one of them, because over the years they slipped quietly out of sight, leaving only the polished version everyone remembers standing alone in the light. The story of how the family came to exist starts with a phone call and a clever bit of self-protection. Matt Groening had spent years drawing a weekly comic strip, and a television producer named James L. Brooks had noticed his work and asked him to come in and create some short cartoons for a new program. Groening at first planned to simply turn his existing comic strip into those cartoons. Then he realized that handing his comic over to a television company might mean giving up the rights to the work he had poured his life into. Sitting in the waiting area outside Brooks's office, not wanting to risk losing his comic, he quickly invented something brand new instead. On the spot, spot in a hurry. He sketched out a cartoon family and scribbled down their names, and the Simpsons were born in a lobby out of a desire to protect a different project entirely. The place where this new family would first appear was a comedy program called The Tracy Ullman Show, named after its star. It was a sketch comedy show, the kind built out of many small separate skits and bits rather than one long-running story. The program aired on the Fox network, which in the late 1980s was a brand new television channel, young and scrappy and still trying to prove it belonged alongside the older, bigger channels. To help fill out the program and bridge the spaces around the advertisements, little animated clips of the Simpson family were dropped in. They played just before the ads or just after them, small bursts of cartoon used to glue the rest of the show together. Each of these little clips was short, lasting only about a minute or a minute and a half before the program moved on to something else. They were never meant to stand on their own or carry any real weight. They were small, recurring treats. A quick scene of family life folded into the middle of someone else's comedy show. There one moment and gone the next. A viewer tuning in for the sketch comedy would get a tiny dose of this odd yellow family scattered through the hour, almost like a running side joke that kept popping up between the main attractions. The very first of these little cartoons aired in the spring of 1987. It was called Good Night, and it captured a simple bedtime scene, the kind of small, ordinary family moment the early shorts loved to show. It ends with the three children, frightened, all piling into bed with their parents. From that humble start, more and more of the shorts followed over the next 2 years or so, until 48 of them had been made and broadcast in total. They kept arriving steadily, each one a tiny window into the same household going through some small everyday situation before landing on a quick joke at the end. The little stories these shorts told were modest and homey, drawn straight from the small dramas of family life. In one, called Shoplifting, Bart gets caught trying to steal candy, is left alone with the stolen sweets for a moment and gobbles them down to hide the evidence, only to look in a mirror and find chocolate smeared all over his face and hands. In another, called The Money Jar, Marge cleverly warns the children not to touch a jar of money in the kitchen, setting a quiet trap that Bart, of course, walks right into. These were not grand adventures or wild fantasies. They were tiny slices of an ordinary, messy household, the sort of small troubles any family might recognize, told in under 2 minutes. What strikes almost anyone who watches those early shorts now is how rough the family looks. The drawings are lumpy and uneven, the lines shaky and unsure, the faces oddly shaped and not quite matching the smooth, confident look the show would later settle into. There's a well-known reason for this roughness, and it comes down to a simple misunderstanding. Groening handed in quick, loose sketches of the family to the team who would turn them into moving cartoons. He assumed, the way most artists naturally would, that those team members would tidy up his rough drawings and smooth out the lines before bringing them to life. That assumption turned out to be wrong, and the mistake left its mark on everything that followed. Rather than cleaning up the sketches, the animator simply traced directly over Groening's rough drawings exactly as they were, scribbly edges and all. So the loose, unfinished quality of those first quick sketches ended up baked permanently into the finished cartoons. The family looked rough because the rough draft was never polished. What was meant to be a starting point became the final product, and the earliest Simpsons carried the wobble of a doodle that nobody ever went back to fix. The differences run far deeper than the shaky drawing. In those earliest shorts, the family members are recognizable, and yet something about them feels slightly off, like staring at an old childhood photograph of someone before they grew into their adult face. Their proportions are strange and a little awkward. Their movements are stiff and jerky, with the same handful of drawings reused over and over again to save time and money. Everything about them has the feel of a first attempt, a version of the family that has the right pieces in roughly the right places, but has not yet been refined into something graceful. The strangeness reached past their looks and into who they were on the inside. Lisa, who the world would later know as the brilliant, thoughtful, deeply moral heart of the family, started out as something much closer to a second Bart. In the early shorts, she was a fellow troublemaker, a partner in mischief rather than the wise conscience she would become. The whole household felt rowdier and more chaotic in these early clips, the family arguably even more of a mess than they would grow into later. The people were all present, but their personalities were still loose and unsettled, still drifting toward the fixed shapes they would eventually hold for decades. One thing, remarkably, stayed steady from the very first moment, and that was the way the family sounded. The voices in those crude early shorts came from the very same small group of actors who would go on to voice the characters for the next several decades. The man behind Homer, the woman behind Marge with her unmistakable low, scratchy tone. The woman behind Bart and the woman behind Lisa were all there from the start. Even the soft sucking sound of baby Maggie's pacifier was present, made in the earliest days by Groening himself. The family already had its full, familiar voice long before it had its familiar face. That gap between sound and sight creates a strange experience for anyone watching the shorts today. A person who closes their eyes during one of those early clips hears The Simpsons exactly as they know them, every voice landing just right, warm and instantly recognizable. Opening their eyes, though, reveals a stranger, lumpier version of the family on the screen, drawn in those shaky early lines and moving in those stiff early ways. The ear says home, while the eye says something is not quite right yet. The sound of the family arrived complete from the very beginning, while the look of it took years to catch up. The little crew responsible for making these cartoons was small and worked quickly. The animation was handled at a modest studio by a tiny team of just a few artists, turning Groening sketches into moving pictures on a tight budget and an even tighter schedule. With so little time and money to work with, corners were cut at every turn. Movements were kept simple and limited. The same drawings were reused again and again to stretch the work as far as it would go. The results carry a certain rough charm, but they are plainly the output of a small operation squeezing out quick clips to fill gaps, rather than a grand, carefully funded production. None of the people bent over those drawings could have guessed what they were building. To them, it was a side job, a small recurring segment for a sketch comedy show on a struggling new network. They were drawing a lumpy cartoon family for clips that lasted barely a minute, with no reason to think any of it would outlive the program it was tucked inside. The idea that this rough little family would one day become one of the most famous and longest-running television creations in history would have seemed absurd in those early days, and yet that is exactly what the small crew was quietly setting in motion. Across the 2 or so years the shorts ran, a slow and steady change can be watched happening almost in real time. The earliest clips from the first year are the roughest, the wobbliest, and the furthest from the look the world would come to know. As the months rolled on and more shorts were produced, the drawing grew firmer, the characters grew neater, and their faces inched closer and closer to the clean, confident shapes waiting in the future. By the final stretch of the shorts, the family had nearly grown into the version they would carry into their own program. Watching all the shorts in order works almost like a time-lapse of a single drawing being refined, a rough doodle slowly tightening into a finished design, one short clip at a time. The shorts ended up doing their job far better than anyone had expected them to. People watching the comedy program grew genuinely fond of the little family cartoons scattered throughout it, fond enough that the network began to think The Simpsons deserved more than a stray minute here and there around the commercials. The decision was made to give the family a program of their own, a full half hour built entirely around them. The rough little side segment had earned a promotion that almost no side segment ever gets. At the very end of 1989, that new program finally arrived, opening with a Christmas story about the family. With it, The Simpsons stepped out of the cramped corners of someone else's comedy show and walked into a whole world made just for them. The leap was enormous. They went from minute-long bridges between advertisements to the stars of their own half hour, from a small recurring joke on a variety program to the center of their own series. From there, the family would go on to a level of fame that the crude early shorts had never so much as hinted at. Once the big show took hold and grew popular, the little shorts that started everything quietly drifted into the background of history. They became hard to find, rarely shown, tucked away in places most fans would never stumble across. Out of all 48, only a small handful have ever been given a proper release to the public. The very first one, Good Night, was included on an early home video collection of the show's first season. 5 of the shorts were stitched into a special clip episode of the main series years later, granting them a brief moment back in the spotlight. About a dozen of them appeared on some collection tapes sold back in the 1990s. Beyond that scattered handful, the great majority of the shorts have never received a simple, easy-to-find official release. At one point, a promise was floated that all of them would finally be made available to fans, yet the complete collection never truly materialized in any clean, lasting form. So the 48 little cartoons that launched one of the most successful shows in television history remain oddly out of reach, present somewhere but absent from the places where the rest of the show lives. The very beginning beginning of the story is the part hardest to actually watch. The reasons they stayed hidden are tangled and not entirely simple. The shorts belong to a different time and a different look, made for and shown as a piece of an entirely separate program, which complicates how and where they can be presented now. The main series almost never reaches back to them or acknowledges them. They do not play in the endless cycle of repeats the way the regular episodes do, year after year. So they sit in a kind of half-light, known to exist, occasionally talked about, sometimes glimpsed in pieces, but rarely watched in full by even the people who love the show the most. There is something quietly touching about that buried beginning. The entire world came to know The Simpsons through the smooth, polished, instantly familiar version, the one with the confident lines and the settled personalities and the carefully built town full of hidden jokes. Almost no one knows the lumpy, jerky, half-formed family that came first, the rough sketches brought to flickering life by a small crew filling gaps in someone else's comedy show. The contrast between the two is striking, a finished masterpiece sitting on top of a shaky little doodle that hardly anyone remembers. Yet that wobbly first draft is where every bit of it started. It is where the famous voices were first recorded, where the family first moved and spoke, where Lisa was still a troublemaker and the drawings still shook and the animation still stuttered. It is the seed that everything else grew from, the small, rough thing that held inside it, somehow, the future of a show that would run for generations. The finished program is what the world remembers and celebrates. The 48 little shorts are the quiet, half-hidden truth of how all of it really began, waiting patiently in the dark for anyone curious enough to go looking for the family before they were the family. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. From those tiny beginnings, the family kept growing, and the show kept growing right alongside them, until it became something almost impossible to picture from the days of minute-long cartoons squeezed around commercial breaks. It grew so large and reached so deeply into so many homes that it gained a strange new kind of power, the power to hold a single secret over an entire country at once. And there came a moment when the show stretched that power to its very limit, building a mystery so enormous and guarding its hidden answer so fiercely that false versions of the ending were created on purpose, made and kept ready for no reason other than to throw everyone off the trail of how it truly ended. Section 9. The secret the whole country tried to crack. By the middle of the 1990s, the show had grown into something enormous, watched by millions of people week after week, woven so deeply into everyday life that what happened on it could become news. With that size came a strange new kind of power, the power to hold a single secret over an entire country at the same time. And once, the show stretched that power as far as it could possibly go, building a mystery so big and protecting its answer so fiercely that the people making the show created fake versions of the ending on purpose, just to keep the truth from slipping out. The story of that mystery is one of the most remarkable things the show ever did. The mystery centered on Mr. Burns, the ancient, withered, fabulously rich old man who owns the town's power plant and serves as the show's longest-running villain. Burns had always been cruel and greedy, but in this story the writers pushed him further than ever. He schemed to steal the town's oil out from under it, and then, in a move of pure cartoon evil, he built a giant device to block out the sun over the whole town, plunging Springfield into permanent shadow so that people would be forced to rely on his power plant for light. By the end of his scheme, Burns had wronged nearly everyone in town. He had made enemies of practically every character the show had ever introduced. That was the clever foundation of the whole mystery. By having Burns hurt so many people so badly, the writers gave almost every character in Springfield a real reason to want him gone. The angry crowd of people he had wronged became a long list of suspects, each one with a genuine grudge. So when the moment finally came, there would be no shortage of people who might have done it, which is exactly what a good mystery needs. The moment arrived at the very end of the episode, on a dark night in the town square. Mr. Burns, having finished gloating over his latest cruelty, is suddenly shot by an unseen figure. He stumbles, clutches himself, and collapses onto the sundial in the center of the square, gravely wounded. The crucial thing is what the audience does not see. The show never reveals who pulled the trigger. The screen shows Burns falling, but the person responsible stays hidden in the shadows, their identity a complete blank. With that, the episode ended, closing out the entire 6th season and the single biggest question the show had ever asked. The wait that followed was brutal in the best possible way. The first part aired in late spring, and the answer would not come until the show returned in the early autumn, which meant fans were left hanging for about 4 long months. Across that whole summer, with no new episodes to settle it, the question of who shot Mr. Burns turned into a genuine national obsession. People argued about it at work, work and at school and around dinner tables. They traded theories, pointed at suspects, and combed back through the first part looking for clues. A cartoon cliffhanger had become a real-life guessing game played by millions of people at once. The network leaned into the frenzy by turning the mystery into an official contest. Viewers were invited to call a special phone number to enter, and once entered, they could submit their guess for who the culprit was. The prize was a wonderful one for any fan, a chance to be drawn into the show as an animated character, turned into a cartoon, and placed inside the world of Springfield. The contest poured even more fuel onto an already roaring fire, giving people a real reason to study the clues and commit to an answer rather than just chat about it. The contest itself, though, turned into a bit of a mess. Rather than simply letting everyone call in with an answer, the network first cut the number of people allowed to take part, then made things more complicated by having to phone the chosen participants back. Many people who wanted to play ended up left out, unable to answer when the call came, or shut out by the tangled process. What had started as a fun nationwide game became, for the contest part at least, a clumsy and frustrating affair that annoyed plenty of fans and even some of the people who worked on the show. The truly astonishing part of the whole event was how far the show went to guard the answer. The people making it understood that with the entire country watching and guessing, a single leak could ruin everything. So they treated the ending like a national treasure that had to be locked away, and they built layer after layer of protection around it, going to lengths that few shows would ever bother with for a cartoon twist. To begin with, almost no one was allowed to know the truth. Among all the artists who drew the show, only a single animator, David Silverman, knew who the real culprit was while the episode was being made. The director who handled most of the first part, Wes Archer, guided the whole thing along without being told the ending, learning the answer only near the very end of the work. The secret was held by the smallest possible circle of people, so that even within the team that built the episode, the truth stayed hidden from nearly everyone. The actors who gave the characters their voices were kept in the dark too. Normally a cast reads through a whole script together out loud before recording, but for this episode the group never performed a read of the final act, the part that held the answer. By skipping that group reading, the show made sure that most of the voice cast had no idea who had done it. The people speaking the lines, the very faces of the show, were left guessing along with everyone else. The cleverest trick of all was the fake endings. The writers deliberately created several different conclusions to the mystery, only one of which was real. More than that, several of these false endings were fully drawn and animated, each one showing a different character as the shooter. Versions were made revealing the culprit as Burns' loyal assistant Smithers, as the bartender Mo, as the shopkeeper Apu, as a visiting musician named Tito Puente, as the town drunk Barney, and even as the family's own dog, somehow holding the gun in its mouth. Real, finished, animated scenes were produced for shooters who never actually did it. Even the actor behind Mr. Burns took part in the trickery. Harry Shearer, who voices the old villain, recorded special lines just for these fake endings, so that each false version would sound complete and believable. In one of the decoy endings, Smithers is shown to be the shooter, and Burns, rather than being furious, simply punishes his assistant with a small cut to his pay. The fakes were polished enough to pass as the genuine article, which was exactly the point. The work was even split up so that the artists could not piece the real answer together themselves. Different animators were handed only small sections of the various endings to work on, so that no single person outside the tiny inner circle could see a whole conclusion and figure out which one was true. The fake endings served two purposes at once. They kept the show's own staff from knowing the secret, and they made any leak to the outside world useless. If a false ending slipped out, no one could be sure whether it was the real one or just another decoy. The truth was buried inside a pile of convincing lies. The mystery was also carefully built to reward the most attentive viewers. The first part was packed with small clues, little details hidden in the background and in the action, the kind of thing that could be caught by someone willing to freeze the picture and study it closely. At the same time, the writer set up one character, Smithers, to look like the obvious guilty party, giving him the clearest motive and the most suspicious behavior. He was the trap, the suspect the story wanted everyone to chase, while the real answer waited quietly somewhere less expected. Behind the scenes, the choice of who actually did it had been been a real debate. Early on, the writers Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein had pushed for the culprit to be Barney, the town drunk, partly because he was a character who could believably go to jail, which would shake up the show in a big way. The showrunner at the time, David Merkin, argued instead for Maggie, the baby, because he found the idea far funnier and wanted the guilty one to be a member of the Simpson family itself. One of the show's top leaders, James L. Brooks, agreed that Maggie was the funnier choice, though Oakley and Weinstein were not fully convinced at first. In the end, the baby won out. When the show finally returned in the autumn, the second part played out as a full detective story, with the town's bumbling police chief stumbling through the investigation. Suspect after suspect was looked at and cleared, the trail twisting through the long list of people Burns had wronged. The story teased the audience with the obvious suspect and then turned away from him, building toward the answer the whole country had spent a summer chasing. At last, the evidence pointed somewhere no one had seriously expected. The culprit was Maggie, the baby. The truth came out as a complete accident. Mr. Burns, weak and grasping as ever, had tried to snatch a lollipop right out of the baby's hands. During the struggle between the ancient billionaire and the tiny child over the candy, the gun that Burns was carrying slipped loose and tumbled into Maggie's lap. And as it fell, it went off. The most feared villain in town had been brought down by an infant who had no idea what she was doing, all because he tried to steal a piece of candy from a baby. It was the funniest and most surprising answer the writers could have landed on, and almost no one had guessed it. The show added one last sly touch to the ending. After the accident is explained away as pure chance, the final moment lingers on Maggie, and her eyes shift ever so slightly, giving a quick, knowing little look. It is the smallest of gestures, easy to miss, and it plants a tiny seed of doubt. The scene leaves a faint, playful question hanging in the air about whether the baby was quite as innocent as everyone decided she was. The show solved its mystery, and then, with one flick of a baby's eyes, gently reopened it. The contest that had whipped up so much excitement ended on a strange note. When all the official entries were counted, not a single person who had gone through the proper contest had guessed that Maggie was the shooter. The answer had been too surprising, too well hidden. Pressured by the network to hand the prize to somebody, the team ended up choosing a contestant who had guessed that Smithers did it, awarding the reward to a wrong answer simply because no right one had come through the official channels. There was one person who had correctly named Maggie, but they had posted their guess on an online discussion board rather than entering the real contest, so they could not be reached or counted as the winner. The one who got it right was the one who could not win. Over the years that followed, the show could not resist poking fun at its own famous twist. In a later episode, Homer misremembers the whole thing and insists that Smithers was the one who shot Mr. Burns, prompting Lisa to grumble that such an answer would have made far more sense than the truth. In another episode much later, Homer casually claims that he himself shot Mr. Burns and simply pinned the blame on Maggie. The show had built one of the most carefully guarded secrets in television history, and then it spent years gently teasing the very ending it had worked so hard to protect. What makes the whole thing almost impossible to imagine today is the world it happened in. There was no quick way for the answer to spread before its time, no instant flood of leaks reaching everyone at once, so a secret could actually be kept across a long summer if it was guarded well enough. The show took full advantage of that quieter age, throwing up its walls of fake endings and hidden truths and ignorant cast members, and it succeeded almost completely. A mystery that gripped an entire country was protected so thoroughly that even most of the people building it could not have spoiled it if they tried. The lengths taken seem almost unbelievable for a cartoon. Fully animated false endings, voice recordings for shooters who never shot anyone, work chopped into pieces so no one could assemble the truth, a cast left guessing, a single animator carrying the real answer. All of that effort, all of that careful trickery was spent to protect one joke, one surprising punchline about a baby and a lollipop and a billionaire too greedy to leave a child's candy alone. The show treated a comedy twist with the seriousness of a guarded vault, and in doing so, it turned a season-ending cliffhanger into a genuine piece of television history that people still talk about decades later. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The mystery showed just how much weight the show's choices could carry, how a single hidden answer could hold a whole nation's attention. Yet the show's words and pictures could carry a different kind of weight too, a heavier and more dangerous one. There was a moment when a single quiet joke, just one line tucked into one episode about a powerful, faraway government, would prove sharp enough that the episode itself would quietly vanish from screens across an entire part of the world, pulled out of sight so that the people there could not see what the show had dared to say. Section 10. The jokes that made an episode vanish. The show's choices cases could hold a whole nation's attention, as the great Mr. Burns mystery proved over one long summer. The show's words and pictures, though, could carry a heavier and far more dangerous kind of weight than any guessing game. There came a point when a single quiet joke, just one line tucked into one episode about a powerful, faraway government, turned out to be sharp enough that the entire episode quietly disappeared from screens across a whole part of the world. The people living there could no longer watch what the show had dared to say, and the story of how that happened reaches into some of the most serious history a cartoon has ever brushed up against. The episode at the center of it comes from the 16th season, first shown in the year 2005. In it, the family travels all the way to China, mostly so that one of Marge's sisters can adopt a baby girl from there. The trip gives the show a chance to send the whole family wandering through Beijing, the capital of China, poking gentle fun at the things they see along the way, exactly the way the family always does whenever it visits somewhere new and famous. Most of the episode is light and silly, a fish-out-of-water adventure set in a faraway country, full of the usual mix-up jokes that come from the family being loud and clumsy in a place where they do not belong. Tucked into that lighthearted trip, however, is a joke that turned out to carry real bite. While in Beijing, the family visits Tiananmen Square, an enormous and historically important public space in the very heart of the city. There, the show places a sign for the family to walk past, and the sign claims that on that exact spot in the year 1989, nothing at all happened. On its surface, it reads as a simple, strange little gag, the kind of odd background sign the show loves to slip into a scene. Underneath, though, it is a sharp jab at something painfully real, and understanding why takes knowing what actually did happen in that square in that year. In 1989, Tiananmen Square was the site of huge demonstrations. For weeks, enormous crowds, many of them students, gathered there to call for greater freedom and a bigger say in how their country was run. The government chose to answer those demonstrations with force, sending soldiers and tanks into the square to clear the protesters out. Many unarmed people were killed in the crackdown that followed. No one knows the exact number who died, but it is widely believed that hundreds and quite possibly thousands lost their lives. The day became one of the darkest and most sorrowful moments in the country's modern history, remembered around the world even as it was hidden at home. What makes the moment even harder is everything that came after it. The Chinese government worked, and has kept working ever since, to erase the memory of that day from public life. Open discussion of it is heavily restricted inside the country. Books, photographs, websites, and even ordinary conversations about it are blocked, removed, or quietly discouraged. For many young people growing up there, the event was simply scrubbed out of the official story they were taught, treated as though it had never taken place at all. Rather than face the memory, the country's leaders chose to bury it year after year, hoping it would fade. That choice to erase is exactly what the show's little sign was mocking. The joke about nothing having happened on that spot was a pointed dig at the way the government had tried to pretend the crackdown never occurred. The episode did not stop there either. It also leaned on another famous image from that time, the photograph known all over the world of a single brave figure standing alone in front of a long line of military tanks, refusing to move and blocking their path. The show recreated that haunting image inside its own cartoon world, folding one of the most powerful photographs of the entire 20th century into a comedy about a family adopting a baby. So the episode did not wander into the subject by accident. It deliberately pointed at one of the most censored events in the country and built a joke directly about the act of censorship itself. For many years after it first aired, the episode was simply one of the show's many trips abroad, watched and then forgotten like any other adventure. It sat in the vast library of episodes, no more remarkable than the time the family visited any other country. The joke about the square was just one gag among hundreds, easy to miss and easier still to forget. Nothing about its early life suggested it would one day become the center of an international story about freedom and censorship. It waited quietly for years, harmless and ordinary, until the world around it shifted under its feet. Then, in late 2021, the situation changed in a way no one had planned for. A large streaming service, the one run by the giant company that by then owned the show, launched in Hong Kong, a city sitting on the southern edge of China. Hong Kong had long been a place apart from the mainland. It had once been a British territory, and even after it was handed back to Chinese control in the late 1990s, it had been promised that it could could keep many of its own freedoms, including stronger traditions of free speech than existed in the rest of the country. For decades, that promise mostly held. People in Hong Kong could openly discuss, publish, and remember the events of 1989, even holding huge yearly candlelight gatherings to honor those who had died in the square. When the streaming service finally arrived in Hong Kong, fans of the show quickly noticed something strange about its library. Nearly the entire run of the show was there, season after season, episode after episode, just as it should be. But in the 16th season, one single episode was simply gone. The list of episodes jumped straight from the 11th to the 13th, skipping right over the 12th, the very episode with the China trip and its Tiananmen Square joke. The one episode that mocked the erasing of history had itself been erased from the service in that city, leaving a small, telling gap exactly where it should have been. The timing of that gap told its own quiet story. Hong Kong had recently come under much tighter control from the mainland government. A sweeping new security law had been put in place, aimed at stamping out the kind of protest and dissent the city had seen, followed by further rules that allowed the banning of films and other works judged to be against the government's idea of national security. The yearly gatherings that remembered the 1989 crackdown had been shut down. A museum dedicated to those events had been forced to close. The very freedoms that had set Hong Kong apart for so long were shrinking quickly, month by month. And into that tightening grip, the streaming service launched with the one episode most likely to anger the authorities simply missing from its shelves. The company behind the service never gave a clear public reason for the gap. When asked, it declined to explain why the episode was absent, leaving the rest of the world to draw its own conclusions. It remained unclear whether local officials had ordered the episode removed or whether the company had quietly pulled it on its own, deciding for itself that the joke was too risky to show in that particular place and choosing to avoid trouble before any trouble arrived. Either way, the result on the screen was the same. An episode that openly made fun of a government censorship had itself been censored, in a city where, only a few years earlier, it could have aired without anyone blinking. There was one small crack in the wall. People in Hong Kong who used certain tools to disguise where their internet connection appeared to be coming from could still reach the episode, tricking the service into thinking they were watching from somewhere else entirely. So the episode was never truly destroyed or made impossible to find. It was simply hidden from anyone watching in the ordinary, official way, which for the vast majority of viewers meant it had effectively vanished. A determined person with the right know-how could still pull it up, but the everyday subscriber scrolling through the show on their couch would find only the empty space where it used to be. The whole situation carried a strange and bitter kind of irony, almost too neat to be real. The episode existed in the first place to laugh at the way a government tried to pretend a painful event had never happened, to mock the very act of erasing history from memory, and then that exact episode was erased, pulled out of view in a city watching its own hard-won freedoms fade away. The joke about pretending nothing happened was answered, years later, by a real-life attempt to pretend the episode itself was not there. A cartoon gag had circled all the way around and landed, sadly and perfectly, in the middle of the real world it had been poking fun at all along. The episode also turned out not to be the only creative work caught in that same net at that same moment. Around the time of the streaming launch, a new art museum was opening in Hong Kong, and lawmakers there called for the banning of a photograph by one of China's most famous artists, a man living in exile after years of clashing with the government. In that photograph, the artist raises his middle finger toward Tiananmen Square, a small act of defiance frozen in a picture. The museum quietly removed the image from its online collection. So the disappearing episode was part of a larger pattern, one work after another touching on that single forbidden subject and quietly slipping out of public view in the city. The show's episode also did not stay alone for very long as a casualty. A second episode would meet a similar fate in the same city for a similar reason only a little over a year later. This newer episode from around 2022 included a line spoken by Marge as she rattled off a sarcastic list of so-called wonders of China. Among the things she mentions are forced labor camps where children are made to build smartphones, a sharp reference to serious accusations that have been raised about working conditions and human rights inside the country. The line was brief, just a passing joke dropped into the middle of a scene, but it touched the same kind kind of nerve as the first. That newer episode, too, turned up missing from the streaming service in Hong Kong. Once again, an episode containing a pointed jab at the Chinese government was simply not there for viewers in the city, while the rest of the show sat untouched. It became the second episode quietly dropped from view, deepening the pattern and the worry behind it. The Chinese government, for its part, has firmly denied the accusations about forced labor that the joke referred to, calling such claims false and unfair. That disagreement over what is actually true sits right at the heart of why a single throwaway cartoon line could become a problem worth removing an entire episode over. Taken together, the two missing episodes painted a clear and troubling picture of how much the world had shifted around the show. Both episodes had aired without any trouble at all when they were new. Both had been watched freely for years, including by people in Hong Kong, as perfectly ordinary parts of the program. Only later, as the space for open speech in the city steadily narrowed, did they quietly become problems, things to be tucked away out of sight. The episodes themselves had not changed in the slightest. The world around them had changed, and that changing world reached back across time and pulled them off the shelf. There is something almost dizzying about a silly comedy cartoon becoming tangled up in matters this heavy. The show is, at its very heart, a goofy program about a yellow family in a made-up town built on jokes and warmth and gentle mockery of everyday life. Yet because it grew so large and traveled so far, reaching screens in nearly every country on Earth, its jokes ended up brushing against some of the most serious subjects imaginable, including the memory of people who died demanding freedom and the treatment of workers far from home. A throwaway gag written purely for a laugh in one country could become a genuine headache for a government on the opposite side of the planet. The episodes also reveal a different kind of disappearing act than the show had seen before. Earlier, episodes had vanished because of who was hidden inside them, or because of a tragedy that had struck the real world without warning. These episodes vanished for a sharper, more deliberate reason. They were removed because of what they dared to say out loud, because their jokes pointed directly at the actions of a powerful government and flatly refused to look away or soften the blow. The cause was not an accident of history or an unlucky coincidence. The cause was the show's own stubborn willingness to make a joke that someone in power did not want made. That willingness was woven into the show from the very beginning. From its earliest days, it built its whole name on poking fun at the powerful, at presidents and bosses and bullies and anyone who took themselves a little too seriously. Most of the time, those targets simply had to grumble and swallow the joke, because there was nothing else they could do about it. But when the target was a government with the reach to control what an entire city was allowed to watch, the joke suddenly carried a real cost. That cost was paid not by the show, which lost nothing, but by the viewers in that city who lost the chance to ever see it through the front door. For viewers across most of the world, both episodes remained perfectly easy to find, sitting in the show's enormous collection like any other half hour. The gap existed only in the one place where the jokes had struck too close to a tender nerve. So the show ended up living in two different versions of reality at the same time, complete and untouched almost everywhere, quietly trimmed in the single city where its words had become too dangerous to allow. The very same episodes were both freely available and carefully hidden, and which version a person met depended entirely on where they happened to be sitting when they pressed play. The whole story leaves behind a quiet, uneasy thought about how far a joke can travel and what it can run into along the way. A few lines written long ago by people sitting around a table in a writer's room, meant only to earn a laugh and make a small point, ended up tangled in enormous questions of memory and freedom and power on the far side of the globe. The show had reached so deeply into the world that the world began to reach back. Sometimes it reached back warmly, with a national guessing game and a long summer of friendly arguments, and sometimes it reached back coldly, with a silent hand slipping in to pull an episode off a screen, so that a difficult truth would stay buried just a little while longer. Through all of it, the episodes themselves never changed. The jokes stayed exactly as they were first written, sitting quietly in the show's enormous library, as easy to find as ever across most of the world. Only the air around them shifted, hardening in one corner of the globe until a few harmless gags became something to hide. A cartoon built to poke fun at the powerful had simply gone on doing what it always did, and the powerful, for once, had the reach to answer back by making the laughter quietly vanish. So that is where these episodes finally come to rest. Never destroyed, only tucked gently out of sight. A small and lasting proof that even the silliest show in the world can say something true enough to make someone look away. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.